Hi, it's Richard.
And I'm Alex. Welcome to the Siebel Hub Learning Experience.
Get ready for Siebel 22 with the most up-to-date modular training course available. Learn more with clear, precise instructor presentations.
Team 2 has a mid-level release they want to push to integration test and then incrementally migrate that content to the test database.
Learn better with comprehensive exercises and demonstrations.
Now the next step to be executed is the business service, and we can click Simulate Next. This executes the business service and we can inspect the output in the workflow process data panel.
Learn faster with high-quality course materials. Go to siebelhub.com and start learning today.
And yeah, this time of the year, it's spring in most of the places where we are, except you're in the southern hemisphere. And there's a spring release, so to speak, 22.3. And that's the first we talk about. The first thing we talk about is, of course, the new features that have been introduced in 22.3. You see them on your screen right now, and that's the first part of the session today. And I've just made a few notes. You have seen those notes as well. I have a bit of an update on the devpops utility, the devpops learning utility. There's a new update out there. Then I have one topic which we might skip in favor of Jason's discussion that he asked to do, but it's a bit of an idea I have about Siebel Retro, and there's a survey we're doing. I will introduce you to that. And Jason suggested we have a discussion or brainstorming on unit testing in Siebel. So let's get right on. So 22.3 introduced one REST enhancement for you can now invoke workflow processes, so that's cool. And one particular feature is for Siebel loyalty. So then there's a few things in Bookshelf that I noted. siebdevcli for renaming repositories changed a little bit. The repository upgrade utility is now documented officially in Bookshelf, and also the cross-version migration is documented. And then there's a new button in Web Tools, yay, and a new feature for message broadcast. So we'll go one by one. This is a list of all the current inbound REST API resources that Siebel exposes. So bit of a hands up here, asking the crowd to participate. You can use the chat or any other means, microphone. How many of you are, or what are you doing with REST? So nothing, that means you're not using it, or are you doing data integration, or are you using it for invoking business services, or even the workspace API? So what API are you using? That would be interesting if you can just put it in the chat. Quick note there. And as you type that in, so the new kid on the block, of course, is a workflow process. So in green, that is now a new resource / workflow. Very simple to use, apparently. Just add the process name and it's being invoked. Of course, there's more to that, but we'll do a quick demo. And the existing REST API resources also include the migration application, which has its own REST API, and the Cloud Gateway REST API, which is not officially documented. So I can basically feel Brian and Carrie cringe a little bit here, but it's in the installation guide. There's mention of the Cloud Gateway API, and so you can get an idea how to use it. And I hope that one is documented very soon. So, and yeah, thanks for the chat messages, people coming in. So I'm just reading them for the benefit of the video users. So Nick uses REST inbound to an eTMF system for clinical subjects. Stefan using it for business services and SMC. Brian has used all of them. Okay. REST outbound as well from Nick. And Oleg says for business services, also workflow process manager. So the old style before 22.3, Stefan using business service to dispatch the workflow currently. And Jason exploring Cloud Gateway as an alternative to Server Manager. And Nick demonstrated recently his OAuth application for REST inbound, of course. And Nick Morphis says Cloud Gateway, REST API, send component matrix to Grafana. I'm a bit surprised that a lot of people are using the Cloud Gateway API. That's interesting. Okay, thanks for that. Keep it coming. And
sorry, Alex, what's your surprise about that?
I'm surprised so many people using it despite it not being fully documented.
Oh, okay. I'll take it to do to get it better documented.
Okay. Did I say it should be documented?
Yeah, no, I just didn't realize it wasn't. I had no idea. I get a lot of my stuff direct from the source and don't necessarily realize when we've something's fallen through the cracks of our document.
So they're on the Oracle Siebel GitHub. Duncan's great Docker, what you call it, Docker scripts to generate your own Docker images for Siebel. They have actually, Linux scripts for that calls the SMC API. So it's out there in the open. You just need to know where to look. Yeah. Okay, but let's go back to workflow. So I think I'll just put an example on. So here I have a very simple workflow. So it calls one sub workflow, and it grabs account data for a given opportunity. So imagine clicking on a button in the opportunity, and you get a pop-up with account information, like fields that are not exposed in the opportunity BC. So that's the idea. So it's very simple, and the input is of course an object ID, and you see some. Hi there. Just a glitch. There's some output properties. I haven't declared them as output. That's in out the default, but there's the full address of the data, full address, data location, data URL. So it reads 3 fields of the account. And so here I'm in Postman. And first, well, I can already test it here. So I'm passing in an object ID. You already see I ran it once, but I just run it again for good measure. And there we go. So I get the URL and full address, no location for that account, but that's the account associated to an opportunity with that row ID. And that, of course, could be a business service that you write in script, but it just wanted to prove the point that you can invoke indeed a workflow. So you can see /workflow and then simply the name of the workflow process. Now, is it really that simple? Well, first of all, you have to know the input properties or the hierarchical input properties. You have to get that right. And one great feature here is, of course, describe. So you add /describe here and make that a GET request. And then you get literally the Open API Swagger file for that specific workflow. So with all the input and output arguments in the describe. So your external system can read that, or Postman can import that and helps you making the request. One more thing we have to have in order, it's not allowed to call any workflow you please. You have to have the workflow registered with your responsibility. So let's go to Siebel client. And you might or might not know that in, I think it was 7.5. I can't really put my finger on it. It has been so long. It's along 7.5, 7.7, when it was still Siebel, there were those two views introduced, business process access and business service access. So business service access, everybody who uses REST knows that. You have to register the business service with a responsibility and with workflow processes. In that 7.5 release, it was all about business process and business process description. What was it? BPSL. And so workflow processes became business processes for a while. So that's why it's called business process access. And it's the same principle. There's one for seed data for clinical. And this one I added here. So that's why the demo works. If you don't add your workflow process here with the responsibility assigned to the user who logs in using REST, then it works. You might notice there's a sub-process in that workflow. Just going back here. It calls a sub-process. And that sub-process is actually not, it's not necessary. So that's why I took that example. It's not necessary to register the sub-process, apparently. Not sure if that's on purpose. But works very nice, and it's all documented in REST guide. It's a great addition to the REST API. So Jason says, huge thanks for enabling workflow process invocation to Oracle. Yeah, kudos to the good people who make this happen. Then there's one, I just skip along because I can't really talk about loyalty. That's not my area of strength, but then there's the renaming repositories after full migration, which you might remember from the 21.10 update. As of that version, direct SQL, just simply renaming the repositories in the database in the S repository table, is no longer supported. You have to use siebdevcli. And that's the old, oops, sorry, just get a pen here. So the old switch to migration repository, now old because as of 22.3, there's a new syntax to rename the repository. So switch to migration repository has been replaced by SwitchRepository. So in case you're already using that for your full migrations in 21.10 to 22.2, you have to change those scripts you might have or those notes you might have. And it takes 3 parameters. It takes the name of the current repository, so basically a repository to look for. So that could be Siebel repository. And rename it. SR old is basically Siebel repository will be renamed to old repository, old Siebel repository. And that look for migrated repository and make that Siebel repository. So that I figured out how it works. Should work that way. And I tried it and it works. Yeah.
No, your arrow's backwards though. This last one.
Well,
migrated repository
migrated repository becomes the Siebel repository, right?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I don't know if we ever talked about this. The reason for this, besides the fact we don't like customers or anyone running direct SQL, that is siebdevcli, that this process does more than just rename the repositories. It also takes care of preserving, at this time, and it'll be more things later, of preserving any workflow processes that are in flight. Mm-hmm. So if you have a long-running workflow process, this ensures that it gets preserved in the new version, in the new repository, which means we have to copy it over there and do some special handling to make that happen.
I noticed it actually uses the metadata publisher service for both things, for doing the renaming and doing the workflow process preservation.
Yep.
Yeah.
And there will be more, such as tasks, and possibly others later. We'll see.
Yeah. So, and it will all be in that business service, really. So you could, in theory, I'm just guessing, you could, in theory, also call the business service directly, or
No, probably not, because your Siebel server is probably down.
at that, at that point in time, it should be down. Yeah.
So no.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, you could, I guess, in theory, do it through a developer web client.
Yeah. Or siebdevcli at that.
Well, yeah, just run siebdevcli. But I'm saying you could do it through COM, is what I'm saying. Really saying.
Yeah.
Like if you have a developer web client installed, then you have the COM objects that know how to talk to a that know how to, or not the COM object, but it knows how to reach out to to the database, and so you could then automate that by using, I don't remember which one's which, but the web client COM server, whatever the heck we call it.
Yeah, I think there was a COM data server that would confused me because
I mean, there's 3 or 4 of them, and it's very. I can never remember which is which. I know how to use them, but I can never remember what their name.
Nobody's really using the developer web client anymore, no, these days. Should be. Maybe.
I still use it. I still use it sometimes. It's easier for booting multiple languages than having to have all those OMs up.
Alex?
If I just want to do demos in other languages, I'll just use a dedicated or developer web client for that.
Okay.
Hey, Alex?
Nick, yeah?
On the previous slide, does the migration, what is it? The migrated repository, does that get deleted, or does it still stay there?
It stays there. It's the migrated repository is renamed.
No, it's renamed.
It's renamed, yeah. And the old Siebel repository is also still there. So you still have 2 repositories, and you should get rid of the old one using RR cleanup.
Okay.
Yeah. And you could do that later. I mean, that part, we don't want to delete it in the event that something goes catastrophically wrong with your new configuration. You have a way to go back.
Yeah.
Okay. Because you can always rename back the other way.
Yeah. So, yeah, thanks, Brian, for the clarification here. Also, on a related topic, I know you mentioned it last year, Brian, that essentially you can have a higher development environment and a lower version RR environment. So you have already updated your DR to, let's say, 22.3. And your RR, your production and test environments are still running on an older version, and migration still works. So that is now officially in Bookshelf, and the Bookshelf guide also has one detailed use case when this is actually not supposed to work. Let me put it that way. There's a problematic gap or version threshold to use that word between 20.6 and 20.7. That's when the workflow architecture changes to full workspace enablement, as we know, and that would basically prevent the migration from working correctly. But there's not sure if it's new, but it's not documented. There's a system preference you can set full MIC compatibility mode N if you have that use case. And since Brian is here, Brian, is that correct?
Yeah, I believe it actually was in a knowledge base article, but I'm not 100% sure of that. It's been there in place all along.
Yeah.
We just hadn't documented it.
It's not an entirely new feature, but it's now in Bookshelf.
Yeah, it just wasn't correctly documented. And then it'll right now we have a quote table with one row that says workflow, and it says 20.6 to 20.7. And then when task rolls out in a few months, the same thing will happen with task.
Great, yeah. So
for the same reasons.
So just to be clear, if your DR is on a version higher or equal to 20.7, and your RR is on a version lower or equal to 20.6, then this applies.
Right. Then during the period where that is true, you should set this. So
and it doesn't apply for anything.
You're right. If you don't mind, that where you say incremental migration, the version difference isn't handled by the export. What? Okay, it's for an incremental migration, we can get a watermark
Yes.
from the target. And so the target comes back and says, I'm on 20.6.
Right.
And so we say, we're on 20.7. So in the case of workflow, we export the non-workspace enabled
Workflows.
content
Yeah.
workflow. Okay. And then, but for full migration, there is no watermark. So we can't tell
Right.
what the target version is
Yeah.
on. And so this allows us to tell the system, hey, our target is whatever. So you only have to worry about it for a full migration,
Right. So,
which should be done incredibly rarely anyway, in my view. There's, you can do incremental migration every day for 28 years, and you will, before you hit the max of 10,000. So full migration does not need to be done very often anyway. But if you do have to, for whatever reason, you think it's a good idea, I don't know. At some point, I guess logically there might be a performance problem if you're in, version 9,000. I don't know. In theory,
okay.
maybe it's out there, but
Yeah.
nobody's gotten there and found it yet. So you decide to do a full migration. That's the only time you need to worry about it. If it's not full migration, then no big deal.
Okay. Okay. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, for your clarifications there. Yeah, this one on message broadcast got me a little bit confused. I read bookshelf twice or three times, or the notes. It's actually in the release notes, I think. There's a new user property on the broadcast message BC. It's called exclude all users messages. And if you set that to true or yes, then if I understand correctly, broadcast messages that have the all flag will not be displayed in the notification pane, so users will not see them, which is what the...
Yeah, I have no idea where this came from or why.
Okay, it might be just for one customer, one specific customer, or whatever.
Yeah, there must have been some customer who found that their people were setting alls all the time and causing havoc. I don't know, but I have no idea where this came from.
Okay, not okay.
It's
Right.
it's a weird feature.
Fancy search specification. And yeah, let's say hi to this little button that is now in Web Tools, Workspace dashboard. You can now do undo submit for delivery, not only from Siebel Tools, but also through Web Tools. Okay, so that's the 22.3 highlights. So again, it's accumulating fast. So if you I'm always stop at this slide here. We have it on the YouTube video, on the YouTube channel. We have the monthly update videos. Check out the Siebel Hub YouTube channel. And in every update video, there's a narrated slide deck for how to get to 22.x or 22.3 in that case. It's all described, the exact process for DR and RR environments, as well as notes on the upgrade in case you're not on IP17 or higher yet. So that is just a note. This is all the same content. I don't repeat it here, but it's on YouTube, redundantly on YouTube. Okay, a little bit on devpops. That is the pet project I have, and with help from Jason and Xapuk, we have put together some useful utilities, and I made it into an open UI learning experience, so you can learn how to do things with open UI. So it's not an official plugin or whatever, but I have a quick demo here. So maybe also time for quick, let's say, a round of chat messages. Anybody has explored devpops already? Or? So let me just...
This is what you demoed to me a while back, right?
Yes, partially. So I'll put the devpops link to GitHub in the chat in case you want to grab it or have a look at the code. So basically it establishes itself as a menu where you can call various utilities. And the X-ray is a very old project of mine where I just demonstrate what it does. Let me go to well, big view. Let me turn off, sorry. Let me turn off some of the features here, reload the view. A big view with 3 applets, product administration, so there's a very big form applet, list applet, and the X-ray feature, most of you know that, but some of you might be new to this, is you can literally X-ray the applet, so you can show the control information. So you see it's replacing the labels and headers, and when it adds a tooltip, so you can hover over and read that information. What are, for example, what are the MVG and associate applets, and what's the name of the control and the type of the control. And then there's the BC fields, business component information. So about business component fields, LOV types. So it fetches that stuff from the RR repository, as it should, in theory, and I've tested it recently, it works in RR environments as well. And show columns, well, goes down to the database layer and shows the tables and column names or the calculated values. So that's existing functionality, and the latest devpops, just reload that view again. The latest devpops release includes an extension for the silent mode, where it runs all the scan completely, but it doesn't update the labels. So you notice there's an option button now, and in the option you can say, okay, copy that X-ray data to the clipboard, and so you can paste it in Excel, for example, and clear or not clear any X-ray data that you have. So you go from one view to the other, you can keep the X-ray data, then export all of that. So I'd set both to true and hit save and go. So the X-ray is running silent, so it tells us to wait. And now, since we run it with export to true, it pops up the list of applets it has scanned. We can include some data about the view as well, and click OK. And you saw it flickering for a moment, and that's now in the clipboard. So let me try and get open Excel. And then, yeah, just Control V, basically paste the clipboard content. There you go. Let me just maybe clean it up a little bit. Haven't figured out how to do that, but so you have the view name, business object, applet name, applet type, BC, control. So for each control, you have all the information that X-ray grabs down to the, well, table and column, if there is any table column available. Yeah, what do you think? Crowd goes mild.
That's really nice.
This would have saved many, many hours of design documentation back in the day.
Back in the day, yeah. So, but finally it's here. Yeah. So yeah, and I was thinking about extending this even further with some EIM mappings, but then I wasn't. Yeah, it's very hard to get the EIM mappings, but that's another story even. Okay, so yeah, that's in the latest devpops release on GitHub. And also in that release on GitHub is the sitemap. Yeah. So when you right click on the sitemap button first time, it's as admin, so it has like 4,000 views. So it will come up, hopefully, or not. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So yeah, it's because it has to render those 4,000 views into a menu. So that's really a huge, incredibly huge menu. It doesn't make any sense for sysadmin, but it's as you can see, for example, account screens fully expands into the sub levels. And you can, of course, select from there and go there so that the sitemap becomes a menu. And when you right click again, this should be faster. And you have a recently used section. So I've demonstrated this when it was in beta mode. It hasn't really changed much. So you have recently used views as well on top. And that's kind of the feature I always wanted. And here's an options button, so you can have a flat mode. Actually, flat menu is what it uses now, and flat mode is, let's save it. Flat mode is basically looking a little bit like the original sitemap. So right-clicking again, but having it's the original sitemap more or less with the recently used list. So there you go. So sitemap. Okay. Okay, thanks for the feedback. Yeah, and so that's you can do all of that and even more with OpenUI, right? So that's just a little bit of OpenUI JavaScript with jQuery. I'm old-fashioned, and so if you're I have a suggestion here. So if you feel like, okay, I'm very interested in this portion of devpops, or I've looked into devpops and want to learn more about, just ping me, send me an email, and we can have a free session, talk about what exactly do you need, and this is your way of contributing to the devpops project. So you can just tell me what you have in mind, or brainstorm solutions that you have in mind for OpenUI, and if it's feasible, we will incorporate it in the next devpops version. So again, that's my offer. And Frank says he encountered an issue with the test automation check feature. Yeah, okay, so that's one thing. For example, Frank, we can talk about in private in a separate session. I think I know what you mean, but it would be good if you can ping me, and we'll have a session anytime soon. Okay, so that's news from devpops. And recently I've been tinkering with another OpenUI extension, and I'll just show you what it is. It's different machine here. So let me go to an account list. So we all love the inline search for applets. And now if you select a column, oh, sorry, wrong machine, my bad. It's also here. So let's select the column here. Yeah, so I'm selecting a column, and now I got that's the retro thing, the alpha bar. You recognize that? Good old alpha bar from the old Siebel days or from Siebel tools. And does it work? So can you click letter K, and yeah, there you go, filters by letter K. The difference here is that you can have any number of buttons in a row, and they can do different things. Basically, they write to this field, and you can, well, configure what it writes. So like for the letter A, I've put in a case insensitive search. So like A, uppercase A or lowercase a starting with. So whatever works in that field is supported. So fancy functions the inline search cannot do, but simple things. And that I recently brought up as a physical renderer. It's available on GitHub. So let me go to. So it's a Siebel Hub article. You might have seen that, and it's also on GitHub. So there's the alpha bar. It's just a single physical renderer. Not going through the code right now, there's no time, but check it out if you want. And I see the discussion should be out of the box or whatever. So Carrie and Brian take notes, taking notes here. And yeah, there's a discussion in the chat about row navigation with arrows and one row at a time. There's control up and control down, or on my German keyboard, it's some weird alt key, but I can navigate with the keyboard. Yeah, I think it's here. Navigate. Yeah, there it is. Next record. It's alt comma. Previous record alt. Not sure that's correct, but it's alt dot and alt comma. At least for me, works. Okay, but anyway,
there may be more than one combination in that we may have left one behind, and
yeah,
just like because we thought people were used to it. Is that actually working? The alt
control up and down is also working. Yeah, can confirm.
Yeah, if the reason for the if you look above the comma and period, it's the less than and greater than sign, which are kind of like arrows, so that at least on a US keyboard.
Yeah,
and
right.
So that's why it's not like it's not a completely bizarre choice of characters, because at least on a US keyboard, they're co-located. Just you normally would use shift for one.
Yeah.
For the arrows themselves, but comma and period are underneath it. I think that Outlook does the same thing.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So and so the discussion I want to trigger here a little bit is so this is a full retro feature. It has been available in old Siebel days in the Windows client. It's still there in Siebel Tools, of course, right? I'm not sure if anybody uses it much. More sentimental. Does it make sense at all to bring those retro features back? So is it kind of backwards oriented, or is it a good thing? So is backward orientation good or bad? That's so Nick says good thing. What other features?
I think it's a good thing too, honestly. I mean, we never, some things that didn't materialize in OpenUI were almost certainly because we were trying to get it out the door initially, right? And then they were in some cases forgotten. I mean, there's no reason not to have this letter toolbar, for example.
Right.
Like, it can't hurt anybody.
Yeah, you could with OpenUI you can also make it quickly disappear if somebody doesn't like it.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Okay. So I understand the reason. So you wanted to get OpenUI out of the door, as you say, and some things just went under.
And I mean, and then we've continued to add. I mean, it's like web tools, right? Like we keep adding things to it over time. So it's a question of seeing the demand from customers to add these things back is what inspires us to go out and do so. So if you're telling us that these are things you're missing, file an SR and request it. We'll get it into our enhancement queue, and then some of these low-hanging fruit, like this one would be, we can get in quickly. Others may take a while. Again, depends on customer demand. That's what drives our decisions.
Okay, so because I'm quite sure if you look at other customers, very often when they upgrade from, let's say, high interactivity to Siebel 2020, 21, 22, a lot of these upgrade projects are like trying to bring back the old look and feel of Siebel 7 high interactivity, and that is much a style sheet exercise, of course, but also there's a few.
What sort of I don't know, humorous to me about that is the number of people that were on these older versions and said that Siebel was antiquated and didn't have a modern UI. Now they want to go back.
Well, it's one thing if you think that as a developer or architect, but if you have like 5,000 users who just want the thing to look exactly the same.
Mm-hmm. I understand.
Different story.
No, I understand.
Okay, so that's a little bit of retro feeling brought back with a few lines of JavaScript. Yeah, that's of course always the penalty. Well, it's not really a penalty, but you have to add some code to have some features, and OpenUI is just so great to do that. So I couldn't imagine doing that in any other application really, at that speed. All right. Yeah, and here I have one URL I would like to share with you. As you can see, it's a SurveyMonkey URL. It's in the chat now. Let me just give it a try and go there. Still up, yeah. So you know that on the Siebel Hub we have a lot of training. So going back to the Siebel Hub homepage, go to Knowledge, Siebel CRM training. You see all the courses we have, the Siebel 22 workshop, upgrade, OpenUI, just talked about OpenUI, and other trainings. And they're pretty generic. So let's say, well, except OpenUI, which is very specialized, but 22 workshop tells you all about the modern versions of Siebel. But in this survey, we are actually asking you, customers and people out there, what would you like to see in this list? So, and you see that we made some choices for you to check, or you can just write it in the second part, in the second box, and click done. So it would be great if you have a minute to, well, let us know on the Siebel Hub what we should focus on for the next training that is to be announced maybe soon. Okay, so that's the current survey, and when I published the blog post about today, Jason commented, and that's what I always ask you to put your ideas and your suggestions in a comment. So Jason has put a comment in about unit testing. So I may just go there and find it. Sorry, I forgot to prepare the link, but I should have it. There's the post. And in the meantime, there's a question from Carl in the chat. Anyone heard if there's going to be a Siebel presence at Oracle Cloud World this year? So I leave this to the Oracle people to answer.
We're still getting clarification on that, but our expectation is we will have some people there. But in general, for Oracle, they're trying to make it more customers and fewer like booths and that kind of thing, especially since much of it will be virtual. So we almost certainly won't be physically anywhere, demonstrating the product or anything, but we'll probably have a few sessions. The specifics of that, again, are still to be determined. I just talked about it yesterday, or George just talked about it with his directs yesterday. And he said he hasn't been informed yet either, other than we know there will be, it's been implied we will have something. We just have no clue yet what it is. They haven't told us. So,
okay.
Likely they'll allocate us some number of sessions, and then we'll have to look at that number and figure out what we think is most important. Certainly, if anyone in this group has strong interest in a given topic and hopes we could have a session on it, send me an email and let me know, and I'll take it into, or at least bring it up when we're doing our planning.
Yeah. Okay. Looking forward to Cloud World, actually. Yeah. Okay. So Jason's suggestion and comment, Jason's curious if anyone has figured out a good way to perform headless unit testing. And Jason mentions JUnit as an example, where we obviously in Java, you write tests and then you execute those tests and you have assertions. So it's not that functional test that's built into Siebel already with the test automation. But correct me if I'm wrong, Jason. It's stage is yours. It's about testing code specifically with test methods, right?
Yes, exactly. And I brainstormed a few ideas in the post, but I'd be curious to see if anybody's written some kind of test harness or some kind of tool to provide an equivalent approximation.
Okay, let's hear it. So what are your thoughts on this? Anyone did something similar already?
So I do recall there was a customer who made it a point with their team to put a web service on top of every business service written, even if that was a business service that normally supports something through the UI,
Mm-hmm.
which sounded like a little bit of extra work, but at least would provide some
Okay.
level of test automation.
Yeah, that's also what came to my mind when I read your comment. But that was probably in the pre-REST days, right?
Yes.
So today is even easier because you can call virtually any business service as a REST call. The only thing you have to register it with the responsibility, of course. So that might be or you could have some kind of proxy service that can call other services. You know, well, we're talking about workflow. Yeah.
What kind of testing are you thinking about? Like user UI testing or just back functional testing, like workflows or back-end processes?
Well, effectively, we want to ensure proper unit test coverage and to automate it in some degree, or at least to be able to show that it was done. We get these requests for unit test case coverage, especially from our compliance perspective and ensuring code security and proper test coverage. And that's just very hard to document and to prove out, at least in
If
historically speaking.
Yeah, and I might. Well, it's a free world, and everybody knows the other CRM system out there in the cloud that's very successful, and I've happened to work with that in the code area, and they actually force you to, hence the name. No, sorry, kidding. They force you to actually write unit tests for the Apex code, which is very much like Java, or is actually Java in the background, I guess. So without having test coverage and test methods in the code base, you cannot even publish it to production. So, and that I thought that first was very annoying, of course, but then of course you get used to it, and then you can't live without tests anymore. But then the system forces developers to do it. So if it's just like well written down somewhere in a Word document or in Jira, nobody will have the time, quote unquote, to do it, right? So that's just the organizational perspective. But
interesting.
Yeah, they have this thing, and it's very much like JUnit. So you have to write a test method, and that method is invoked automatically when you run in test mode, etc. So not sure if everybody knows about JUnit, but there are tons of tutorials and out there for a quick recap. So I had some other ideas, Jason. I was thinking about this before the session. So business service as a web service, well, it could be that proxy service. You imagine a business service that you tell to invoke any other business service. You give it the name of business service, method, and input property set, and then you have some assertions that you pass on, and it checks the assertions. Of course, you have to write that yourself, that harness that you mentioned. And then it occurred to me that I wrote something like that in devpops.
Yes, the business service runner.
The service runner. So it takes the name of a business service. I've saved a selection here, like EI Siebel adapter. So that'll be my test case. Run query page with one page size, and then I get an output, and then all I need is basically an assertion function to check on, let's say, do I have a Siebel message? Do I have 0 error code? Do I have one number of output objects? Or, well, the typical assertion thing, no, you compare values. Would that be in that direction of your way of thinking?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so maybe there's an extension lurking here on the business service runner. And that, of course, runs from OpenUI, right? So you have an OpenUI, you have a JavaScript function basically is behind that. So you can also call that function like headless. You don't have to click in the business service runner. but that's from the browser again. But then now thinking even more for that business service runner is enabled for test automation. So you can record a script that puts in all these values and runs it. Okay, so just brainstorming here.
I mean, one other way would be using PowerShell if you want to just pure command line to do the JSON calls. That way it would be completely disconnected from the GUI.
Right. Yeah. So if you have that business service, that proxy, I call it test proxy or whatever, then you can call it from anywhere. Yes, of course, PowerShell, make the REST call. Good idea. Yeah. Okay, but it's like half of that is it's there. Just need to find a way how. Well, and that's that's not half really. It's just for business services. But Jason, what you also want that for business component script and.
And that's where it gets messy because you're starting to tie very quickly into UI dependencies,
right.
Things that have been brought up in the screen. And so I guess in my mind, it's really more targeted toward functions, whatever those functions might be. Very often developers will write functions that call other functions and other business services that, you get this nested effect. And that can happen even at the BC layer.
Right, yeah. Everywhere, literally. Yeah. I remember a discussion with a customer. They wanted no code. They said, okay, we want to use Siebel declaratively, no code whatsoever. And then, of course, they ended up with, okay, we have to write some code because can't do it. And then I said, okay, the next best thing to no code is put all your code in business services.
Mm-hmm.
Never put any code in an applet, for example, and avoid doing it in business components. Make your code generic enough that you can always call a business service. Of course, they ended up with hundreds of business service methods, but that's better than dispersing the code. But in real life, let's say in any other project, there's code everywhere, and you never know what dependencies it has to the UI, as you say, right? So it's difficult to. Okay. Any other ideas on how to automate unit testing on the Siebel code, eScript? Okay. So Jason, anything? What's your next steps basically in your project?
Well, this was just an idea. We'll, continue doing what we do, which is a lot of, the automation tests, and then of course, well, through both the UI and at the web service layer.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it might be an interesting topic to geek out about with some of the folks here. But if there are any other ideas, I encourage you guys to add those comments, if nowhere else, to that blog post.
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting topic, especially for people who, write a lot of code or wrote a lot of code in their past, like I did. There's every programming language has its own unit test capabilities. If let's say if it is a real programming language, I would say. So eScript, eScript doesn't have that, but
exactly.
Not sure about JavaScript though, because there is something, but haven't tried it. Okay. Yeah. So any other topics you would like to see discussed? Well, today or next time. So put them in the chat. Okay. So no messages in the chat. No other topics to discuss. So do hope you enjoyed today's session and have fun with Siebel 22.3. And again, just before we close off, reminder that if you have anything for OpenUI related or devpops specifically, contact me. I'll put my email address in the chat for good measure. So make sure you grab it before I close the session. Frank, yes. Frank just sent a message. Yes. Yeah. Okay, email is in the chat. All right, then the video will be up on YouTube as usual. Thanks very much to Brian and Kerry for joining, for taking the time to represent Oracle here. Much appreciated. Thanks everyone, and have a great day, great evening. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.